Okay. So I'm just going to go ahead and start. So super quickly, thanks for the guys at T2 for inviting me. Thanks for the generous introduction. It's hard to live up to actually something like that. As long as we're clear, he set the tone. This is not the talk that actually you should be wanting to watch. But again, thanks to you guys for making it out here so early. So I'll go through this really quickly because there's not much point except that I spent a lot of the first part of my career doing breaking into stuff. So spent about 15 years purely doing offensive stuff. Since then, we've tried to do defensive stuff, and right now we actually build some products that we hope help in the defensive space. And mainly the reason I bring this up is because I think it adds some interesting perspective. But that's about all that I'm going to say there. Normally, when I give a presentation, I start with this slide or this quote. For those of you who've never heard him speak, you really should. This is Brian Snow. He was the head of information assurance for the NSA. Other than having a deep voice that immediately conveys gravitas, he's really interesting to listen to. And he gave this talk in Malta a few years back, where he basically said, look, your systems only work because attackers haven't taken you out yet. Like, it's not because you're doing anything right. And anyone who was saying this sort of stuff pre-2010, people were still kind of dismissing. But I think post that, post LulzSec, post the Snowden revelations, it's a lot less of a secret. But having said that, I'm not going to focus on him for this talk. For this talk, I want to focus on his colleague, Chris Inglis, who has this kind of apocryphal quote, because it's not really written down anywhere. Dan Geer lists it from private communication. And he says if we were to score cyber the way we scored a soccer match, the score would be 462 to 456, effectively saying that it's all offense. Okay, and in part, you can figure this is true. The NSA, who at this point, post-Snowden revelations, appear 10 feet tall, like they were owning everyone, they were owning everything. But Snowden walked out after owning their SharePoint and SMB shares, right? So almost everyone is able to pull off offense. On defense, we've still got a few problems. Having said this, I'm not going to be super negative. Especially recently, we've started to see some good wins coming through. Okay, a few years back, I gave a talk at Troopers where I basically said the world is on fire and we haven't figured out how to do anything yet. We've started to show signs of having done some things right. If you've seen the recent Apple versus FBI stuff, sure, some company made a little bit of money unlocking a phone that had nothing of any particular use on it. But it is interesting that we're starting to get to the point where commodity hardware beats one of those fundamental rules, that local access doesn't immediately mean access to information. And it's not completely true yet, but you can see a path to getting there. If you take a look at Chromebooks, you're starting to get TPM-backed solid security that you can buy for $150. You're starting to see, if you look at bug bounties, the prices that are coming out of bug bounties right now are a really interesting proxy for us getting some stuff right. Okay, I think Zerodium now has a bug bounty of something like $1 million or $1.5 million for iOS exploits, which means these things are not just falling off the tree anymore. Okay, it's not just find an old libturf exploit and you're jailbreaking your iPhone. But having said all of this, while you're starting to see some wins in the application security space, enterprise security is still horribly bad, right? If any of you are defending enterprises or if any of you are selling services to enterprises, you'd be aware of these two stats that get thrown about by almost every vendor trying to sell you something. But it is interesting, right? Because Verizon still say that a large number of the guys who they investigate only find out about the breach when they were told it by a third party. And the latest Mandiant report, and I see Microsoft's got a report, and they push it around 190 to 200 days that attackers lurk on networks before they're discovered. And one of the things that's always interesting with this is that those guys almost always play with data that's self-advertising, right? So almost everyone in the Verizon case, people find out they were hacked because the data itself advertises that it's been hacked, right? It's credit cards that then get used, or it's credentials that then get used. In cases where the data doesn't self-identify, I suspect the stuff goes much longer. And we've seen proof of it, right? The Snowden revelations showed at least a few people who were owned for years, easily over 3 to 4 years, that only found out about it when they were reading those slides like the rest of us. And so all of this should just make us very sad pandas. And of course, the question there is, how do we fix this? What do we do about it? And one of the things that people will often point out is what you need to do is think like an attacker, okay? And this concept is not new. Way back in 93, in one of the original papers that started off much of the industry, Dan Farmer and Vitsa Venema spoke about improving the security of your site by breaking into it. When they released this paper, they basically walked you through the hack of a system, and at the same time released Satan, for those of you who remember it. So those of you who remember downloading the tarball and running it. Satan was also called Santa for people who didn't want it to affect their religious sensitivities. But what's worth noting is from 1993, where we were releasing tools that enumerated badness and told you to think like an attacker, down to 2016, where we've essentially got HPE telling you that the key to this whole thing is to think like an attacker. Okay, that's 23 years of telling people to think like attackers, and it's not taken us very far. Okay, and at some point we have to ask ourselves why. Like why hasn't that worked? And Adam Shostak has given this a fair amount of thinking, and he's been picking on this for years. And he says the advice that we give people that says think like an attacker, it's just not prescriptive enough. Okay, he says that there's, he's done like 3 or 4 blog posts on this, where he ranges from being half nice about it to points where he goes, this is just one of the stupidest ideas ever. And what he does say that's really interesting is, he says like, why don't you tell people just think like a chef and see how well they do in the kitchen? Okay, let's see how that works out for you. Okay, and it's an interesting point. Because thinking like an attacker involves a bunch of skills that most people don't have. And again, you get defenders who say that, look, they're able to teach it. I know a few professors who've tried to teach it. We've tried for many years. But I think here the proof of the pudding is in the eating. And the simple thing is our enterprise security does suck, and everyone is getting owned horribly. So I think that's not working out too well. And so we've got to go back to first principles, right? And ask ourselves, like, what's wrong with the advice? Like, does it mean that there's no lessons to learn? And that can't be true, because we see that offense is doing really well. Like, offense keeps improving, it keeps doing good stuff. We've not had any success teaching it, and maybe it's because it's too hard, okay? And that doesn't make any sense, because we managed to teach people brain surgery and we managed to teach people rocket science. So it can't be that this is a fundamentally hard problem and we just can't teach it. And so my theory, the stuff that I'm kind of pitching today, is that maybe we're just taking the wrong lessons from offense. Okay, there's clearly stuff to learn, but we've been focusing on the wrong stuff. And that gives you an excuse to quote Richard Feynman, and any excuse to quote Richard Feynman's a good one. And so he spoke about cargo cult science. Okay, if you don't know the story, it's about in the South Seas, where there's these people who during the war saw planes landing. And so after the war, they imitate everything that they saw. So they've got fake runways, and they've got a guy with coconuts on his head, and a guy sitting on the tower. And these guys do all the right things because they're waiting for these planes to land full of supplies, except the planes never come. Okay, and I suspect when we look at learning from attackers, we're kind of doing the same thing. Okay, we're following all of the external things that we see, but not necessarily grasping the point, which is why that plane just isn't landing. So what I'm hoping today is we can identify some of the different things that help make offense win, and then discuss how we can copy or steal these things. So the way I'm going to do this is I want to look at 4 things really quickly. I want to discuss some of the advantages that I think attackers have, and we're going to look at both extrinsic and intrinsic advantages. To add to that, defender disadvantages, because I think it counts. And then we'll start to look at more hopeful stuff, like defender advantages and hopefully what we can do about it. If we're looking at intrinsic and extrinsic stuff, so with intrinsic stuff, I mean, attackers didn't hope for this. Like, they just fell on this. Okay, so they didn't choose this because they were smarter. It's just built into the nature of offense. Okay, and probably one of the most important things here, I think, is that attackers have very tight feedback loops. Okay, and by this I mean, if you want a pen test team, a red team, or an attacking team, there's very little doubt whether you succeeded or not. Okay, you have your N days or N weeks to break into somewhere, break into something, and either you do or you don't. Okay, there's no doubt about it. When you're a defender, you can fool yourself for many years, and in some cases for your entire career, that you're actually doing something meaningful, when actually the only thing is that you haven't been attacked on your watch yet. Okay, and this is actually a problem because we don't know what works, and more importantly, we don't know what doesn't work, which is why in lots of cases, defense has been doing things over the years that achieve absolutely nothing, okay, or achieves very little. And as time goes on, some of those things just border on ludicrous. And you guys have been doing this long enough, so you'll know, you can think offhand of a dozen examples like forcing people to change their passwords every 2 weeks, or any other of the multiple things that serve really little value, but actually you have entire security departments spending all their time chasing. So we need to find a way to integrate this into defense somehow. Another thing that's interesting is that attackers inherently understand costs better than defenders do. Okay, and this is a bit of a vague statement. In 2011, Dino Daizovi did a talk called Attacker Math, where he put forward this theory, that if the cost to attack you is less than the value of your information to the attacker, you will be attacked. Okay, and what's interesting from that is if you look at it, the attacker, without being particularly clever, knows what his attack's going to cost him because he's in control of it. He knows what your information is worth to him. He knows whether he wants to come after it. As a defender, you don't really know what's the stuff of value to your attacker, and you don't really know how expensive the attack is to the attacker. Now, Dino did an entire talk on this, and the talk is worth watching, despite the fact that almost step 1 of his is he states the talk purpose as trying to think like an attacker. I'm not going to hold it against him, for one thing, because he's Dino Daizovi. But for the other thing, lots of the point of the talk was spot on right. Okay, what he was saying is you should be able to model attackers' choices. And he makes the point during his talk of saying, look, lots of people who were doing attack and then go to defense understand these costs, but he was trying to find a semi-rigorous way of calculating costs when you haven't been an attacker. I don't know if it's successful or not, but the theory holds. And if you have been an attacker for long enough, you certainly should be thinking in terms of costs like this. But essentially what he was doing was trying to find a semi-rigorous way to figure out where you're most likely to be attacked based on what it's going to cost attackers. It's worth checking out. So another thing that frequently comes up when you talk about attack or defense is this theory that attackers only have to win once and defenders have to win everywhere. But I think by now this theory has been pretty solidly debunked. Okay, like it's just not true. If you're a defender, The guys from Lockheed Martin who pitched the kill chain spoke about this a fair bit. But attackers, if you force attackers to reveal themselves, quite often they end up burning tool sets, they end up burning methodology and TTPs. So it's not quite true that attackers have this carte blanche, okay? Because effectively, if you discover them once, they've got to go back and do a whole bunch of reworking. So I'm not going to go into that one at all. A benefit that attackers do have, again, is they get to choose the time and the cadence. Okay, so it doesn't matter if you've planned a weekend away. It doesn't matter if actually this is Christmas weekend or the 4th of July. If that's when the attack is coming, that's when the attack is coming. I guess right now everyone's worried about our Internet of Things DDoSing us on election day again. But effectively, this is one of those things that attackers automatically have, and there's very little we can do about it. So complexity is something else that naturally favors the attacker. Okay, complexity keeps going up. As defenders, we've got more and more things that we need to understand. Again, if you look at my old troopers talk, I talk about why some of this is off the charts ridiculous, considering this display adapter is actually a mini computer with a system on a chip, or VGAs have now been found to have x86 computers inside them. There's microprocessors in everything, and we need to figure out how we defend against it. But I'll give us some hope in a little bit. Extrinsic things that attackers have that are worth thinking about. Attackers are able to throw things away more easily. With a quick show of hands, how many people here work on offense? About half the room. I'm guessing the rest of you are in defense or don't quite want to put your hand up this early in the morning. Something that's worth noting is, and this borders on intrinsic, right, where if attackers have a set of tools, we used to have a tool from FX from Finlit for brute forcing VNC, and as soon as you stop seeing VNC in the enterprise, you stop carrying X4 around with you, right? That's just how it goes. You stop doing it. But you'll find stuff on networks that have to be defended long after they've been useful, okay? And in one part, it's because there's real needs for it, but on one part, it's because we're just not reevaluating and throwing things out, which we should be doing more of. Something else that in part is just so I can start earning the hate on Twitter is that attackers have more clarity, okay? And what I mean by this is, if you look at attackers as a general class, right, you'll find guys who do memory exploitation, okay? You'll find guys who do fuzzing. Ben Nagi's done a few talks on fuzzing and fuzzing at scale. And one of the things you'll notice is that Ben never talks about converting those to exploits, because what Ben does is find bugs and fuzz bugs. And he doesn't care so much about exploitation and doesn't go into it. And then you'll find guys who do exploitation. And then you'll find guys who do infrastructure security, and you'll find guys who do application security, and you'll get guys who do pen testing. They don't build any of those, or most of those tools, they use them. And you've got all the stratification for attackers. And in defense, quite often you find the Infosec guy. Okay, so you find a generic guy who does all the stuff across the enterprise. And what it leads to is a lot of guys speaking beyond their area of expertise. And that ends up hurting, because now you've got some guy who does checklists for a living telling developers that they need a secure development lifecycle. Okay, and it takes the developers about 10 minutes to realize that once you stop saying XSS or SQL injection, this guy doesn't know what he's talking about. And then they stop listening to him or move past it. Okay, and it's something we're going to need to have to fix. Organizations that are further along the maturity cycle have figured this out. But by and large, defense still gets away with a lot of blurred lines. And if there's one thing that you guys take away from this talk, it's this point. And that is the fact that attackers write more code. Okay, and what I mean by this is, if you take a look at a typical pen tester's machine or red teamer's machine, you're going to find his home directory filled with tools that he's either modified or tools that he's actually written. Okay, it's actually a collection of ad hoc, bad Perl, Python, and Ruby scripts. Okay, with a bunch of C and assembly mixed in depending on their skill level. And you'll still bump into tons and tons of defenders who don't code. Okay, and this is a serious, serious problem. At AppSec a few years ago, Alex Stamos did this talk, sorry for the slide quality, where he talks about the secure 100 in the top 500 companies, and then he talks about the toasted 400. Okay, and he says these top 100, it's not that they're safe, it's that they're defendable, they can play the game. And he says everyone below that is not even in the game. And the reason he gives for what separates the top 100 and effectively the rest of the world, if you really think about it, is the ability to write software. Okay, he says those guys are doing IR based on software that they've written. They're using tools that they've written. And Alex actually goes into great depth there where he talks about how they used to be a big FireEye customer and how they're now throwing all of it out because there's just no point. Okay, and in his talk, he says that he means that for companies at scale, but in truth, I think it matters to everyone. Your defenders need to be writing tools and writing their own software. And this is fairly obvious, right? Mark Andreessen, so Netscape Navigator, Mosaic, A16Z, is pretty famous now for his quote that software is eating the world. Okay, because effectively software is a force multiplier, and it's interesting that defenders, if you look at that comparison again, you still see attackers with all of this custom written stuff and defenders with enterprise boxes with blinking lights and SLAs. Okay, and historically we've been taught that this was what we needed to do. Okay, we were taught that the hacky solutions weren't good enough. And so you've got attackers who spend their time building stuff and defenders who wait in line for purchasing to buy stuff. And on a fluid battlefield, one of those two is going to be on the wrong side of history. Okay, and so if there's one thing you take away from this, it's that defenders need to write more stuff. If your defenders are not building their own tools or at least modifying them, you don't have a shot. So with those advantages, I now want to talk quickly about some defender disadvantages, which are not quite the same thing. And one of the obvious ones that you hit, which kind of touches on the information stuff that I spoke about, is this theory of least privilege, which everyone knows, right? So least privilege goes all the way back to Salzer and Schroeder. Basically says whatever is running should run with the minimum privileges needed to run. The problem with this is you've got skewed incentives, right? If you're a defender and you give someone less permission than they need to do their job, you hear about it instantly. If you give them more than they need to do their job, you never hear about it. Okay, so we've got a real problem here with perverse incentives, because even if you mean well, you just don't get the feedback you need when you've done it wrong. Okay, which is why you end up with Snowden-type cases, and it's something we need to look at. But again, to start earning the hate, I want to talk about enterprise obstacles. Okay, and if you're a defender, I want to talk about enterprise obstacles and our attitudes to them. Okay, because often you'll find defenders who look at their networks or look at their companies and will tell you that they know how to defend stuff if only the stupid company would play along. Okay, if only the execs would do the password thing right, if only the architects would do the cloud thing right. There's a whole bunch of things where you could totally solve it if only your company played along. Okay, and for this, you can start to get a little bit dramatic, where, like, I'm not sure if you read Ryan Holiday's book, The Obstacle is the Way, but he based it on Stoicism from Marcus Aurelius, which basically says that what stands in the way becomes the way. Okay, and this is true on when it comes to network defense also. Almost the subtext for the book is that it's not the obstacles that matter, it's how you react to those obstacles that actually define you. And why I think this is particularly interesting is because you start to see a very interesting split between attack and defense here. If any of you have ever heard Halvar talk or had the privilege of attending one of his classes, he talks about exploit development as building a chair from a whole bunch of wood chips and glue. Okay, and he says essentially you've got all these pieces and you've got to put them together to make something meaningful. But if any of you have ever done a pen test, right, a good pen test, you should know that almost all your excitement came from you've got this tiny foothold and you need to convert this tiny foothold into a comfortable beachhead. You've got the comfortable beachhead, you now need to spread out. And if you think about that, effectively what you're doing is you've got time constraints and you've got challenges, and the whole reason for you getting up in the morning is finding a way to overcome those challenges. Okay, and the talks we give from the offense side are, here's all these tight constraints that we had, here's all these impossible problems, but doing X and doing this little trick, we're able to overcome those obstacles. And in defense, we've kind of taken the tone that says, we have to stop these guys from getting phished, even though here's this challenge 1, 2, 3, these stupid users, what am I supposed to do? Okay, both of those are just challenges. We just need to start figuring out that in defense, we need to figure out how we hack around those challenges. Blaming the users for it is not tenable and doesn't work anymore. Again, that is the way. You're not getting paid to know how to secure the perfect enterprise. You're getting paid to figure out ways to secure your broken enterprise. Okay, and there are ways to do it. Increasingly, you're seeing signs from companies like Facebook, with guys like from guys like Etsy, who are finding really nice hacks around the way corporates normally work to try to defend stuff. So this, for us in defense, is mostly attitude modification. So, having said that, there are some advantages that defenders have. Okay, and probably the biggest one is network awareness. Okay, if attackers get to choose what time we're going to engage with them, we get to choose the battlefield. Okay, and it's not an advantage that enough defenders take advantage of. Okay, we completely set the scene for where the whole thing plays out. And over the years, like I've done a lot of pen tests and a lot of consulting with people, and I can tell you, and I hit this point again later, after a month of an engagement, as an attacker, you almost always know the network better than the defenders of that network. And that's ridiculous. Like that's just a stupid state to be in. Okay, and you can't say that it's because defenders are busy, because you just had 4 weeks for that project. Okay, they could have carved 4 weeks in all the time they were doing defense to actually learn what their network looked like. I'll come back to that in a little bit. Another advantage that attackers have that's not used often enough, which is particularly close to my heart, is some form of custom detection. Okay, Alex touches on this in his AppSec talk. The reason he's throwing out FireEye or threw out FireEye is not because FireEye inherently sucks. It's because if you assume that you're up against a nation-state adversary, you have to assume that he can buy FireEye too. Okay, and if he's worth his salt, he can figure out a defense that works past it and then aim at your network. Okay, but now the moment you say this, people scream Kirchhoff at you, that the attacker should know the system. But there is value in attackers not knowing what they're looking at, just like there is value in security by obscurity. Like you say it and almost everyone jumps at you, or everyone who's just passed their CISSP jumps at you. But there is value in both those things, as long as it's not the only thing that you rely on. Okay, and custom detection, even hacked together scripts, like people should be going back and reading the cuckoo's egg, because again, it was just a nice example of custom hacks and custom detection that helped them figure out what was going on. And in fact, in general, I like custom star. Like way back in 2002 when exploits were much lamer, so pre-Metasploit hitting mainstream, we suggested to one of the banks in South Africa that they run with foreign language packs on all of their IIS servers. Okay, because back then exploits were still coding offsets manually, and just something simple like not running the mainstream language packs would change memory layout enough so that general exploits wouldn't work. And again, there's lots of custom little things like this that can be done if defenders change their mindset away from solutions having to be enterprisey for some definition of enterprise. The fundamental problem that you're trying to get past here is the one that says that attackers see the whole chessboard and defenders only see half of it. Okay, so what you're trying to do for your advantage is to add some variability that the attacker doesn't see or doesn't know about. So with this, I want to go quickly into what we can actually do about this. Okay, the one obvious one, the one that's been spoken about a lot recently, is for people to expect breach. Okay, despite the Silence advert about preventing attacks, everyone knows that you're going to be attacked and attacks are going to get through at some point. Okay, what we should be doing is figuring out how quickly we can detect it, how we can contain it, how we can respond to it. And almost one of the key things for this is for us to understand that attacks also look like graphs and chains, okay? So the guy who runs Microsoft Trusted Computing Group is famous for saying attackers think in graphs and defenders think in lists. And depending on which side of the religious war you come up, you either figure that's brilliant or he's got black hat envy, according to Richard Baitlick. But what's interesting to note is that if you start to look at attacks on your network as potential graphs, one of the things you realize is that you don't have to stop attacks at every node. Okay, what you can do is wait for nodes that you think matter enough or nodes that you think you can get enough information from. Okay, so it's possible to sacrifice certain things just as long as you've got other choke points where you're going to catch it. But again, almost the prerequisite to this is that you need to know your network. To quote another guy from the NSA, I'm not sure how many of you watched this talk from Enigma. Rob Joyce is the chief of TAO, the Tailored Access Operations Unit of the NSA. So you should know TAO by now. They're the guys what hack stuff. So they're the guys who own stuff for the NSA. And this guy gave a really interesting talk. And it's interesting not because it's spectacular, but almost because of how unspectacular it is. Okay, because he's very clear. He says, look, if you want to protect your network, you need to know your network. And it's really cool because he does this thing where he says, why are we successful? He's like, because we put in the time to know the network. And he's got kind of this look that you could almost meme. He's like, how stupid? Like, of course, that's what we do. We know the network. And again, it goes back to my point about pen testers knowing networks or application better than defenders do. And for some reason, we've gotten to the point where we allow this to happen. Like as defenders, and I can tell you from many networks we've been on, it almost doesn't embarrass us anymore. Like a pen tester comes in, he had 2 months on your network and he knows your network better than you. Like forget the fact that he owned you. What should embarrass you is that it took him 4 weeks to know your network better than you know your network. Okay, and that's just not a forgivable thing. Like that's something we need to go back and figure out why we're doing it wrong and do it right. And that gives me the very simple, you need to know your stuff. Okay, like I said, there's no way around it, and there's almost no excuse for it. The one concession that I will give on this, when Rob Joyce does that talk, he basically talks about the fact that you've got to know every app and every network and every bit of firmware. And if you've got a network of any significant size, you know that's not going to work. But again, it's why this whole understanding that attacks are graphs or attacks are chains is important, because you don't have to protect everything to the same level, right? You can accept the fact that you're not going to reverse this video adapter. But what you can do is know that you're now allowing an untrusted video adapter on your network, and take plans to make sure that A, it's isolated, or B, you'll start noticing if your video adapter starts calling out to Shenzhen or starts DDoSing people, Brian Krebs. Okay, so with this, with my pitch for how we all need to write software, one of the questions you have to ask is this idiot saying we have to build everything from scratch? Like how far do you go? Do you use your own editor or do you write one? Writing one is going to start to make sense because the escape key is not going to work on new MacBooks for all of the Apple fanboys. But no. So as a company that actually sells solutions, I'm clearly not saying that you have to build everything from scratch. For one thing, from a business point of view, that would be horrible advice for me to give. But I think something that's fundamentally important is a throwback to what was the Unix philosophy. Okay, and Doug McElroy, way back in 1978, put out these fundamentals for the Unix philosophy. Okay, one, make your program do one thing and do it well. Allow your programs to be chained together. Throw away clumsy parts and redo them. Use your tools as force multipliers. The stuff could almost be taken fresh right now. But what's interesting is that when you're a defender, these are not the principles you buy your stuff with. And I'm going to generalize here, but I'll tell you as a company that sells software or certainly sells defensive tools, you'll often hit a company's procurement, and what they're checking, the criteria that they're measuring you on when you go into the enterprise is not those fundamental philosophies. Do you do something well? Can we chain you with other stuff? What they're looking at is a laundry list, a checklist of sorts that, do you have XML integration? These days it's, can you do threat intelligence? Do you take or emit IOCs? If you say you do something with the dark web, you're going to get bonus points. I think almost everything that sells right now needs artificial intelligence. At least if they say machine learning, that's reasonable. But no, we're doing full-on AI for everything in security right now. And what's interesting here, although a complete tangent, Jason Fried's one of the guys from 37 Signals, and he's got this blog post where he talks about the difference between a funded company and a bootstrapped company. And he says that one of the problems you have is when you accept VC funding, on day one, your problem is figuring out what to spend on. And when you're a bootstrapped company, on day one, your problem is figuring out how to get money to survive. And he says this fundamentally affects your company because it shapes your thinking going forward. And I think this applies to us in security also, because on day one, attackers know this is a hard problem and I need to find a way around it. And on day one, defenders have this, I'm buying this thing from this vendor, why doesn't it meet all of my requirements? Okay, and there's almost a fundamental difference that comes in here, where you see defenders, and I know I'm generalizing, having this entitlement, someone will fix it for me, while attackers totally embrace the, I need to hack around this or else I'm going to lose. So, something that's cool and hopeful is that done right, tools become tool chains. Okay, and what I mean by this is way back in like 2010 or 2011, we did this talk, and we were talking about a series of tools that we had done when we were pen testing that were almost completely stupid. So the first time, I'm really good at naming stuff. I wrote this tool called OneTime because we effectively found a server where we could execute commands on it but get no feedback other than timing differences. Okay, so we wrote a tool that would extract information over those timing differences. And if you guys are doing pen testing, it's relatively obvious how you do this nowadays. You basically say if it's a 1-bit, sleep n seconds. If it's a 0, sleep 0. Calculating the difference, you can start to read stuff off it. So onetime.py was cool. Part of the reason I like it is one of the most visually attractive hacks you ever get. Like you run your exploit and you see your stuff building one character at a time. Very Mr. Robot. But what's cool is, from onetime.py, we took that timing channel and built it into a tool that we called Squeezer. And Squeezer effectively allowed you to do SQL injection, and then we added timing attacks to that SQL injection tool. So by the end of it, Squeezer was able to very comfortably download binaries from the SQL server, upload binaries all over timing differences. Okay, and the following year, we built a tool called Reader, which essentially allowed you to do full TCP communication over SQL injection. And because we had timing over SQL injection, Reader effectively, in this horrible Frankenstein of attack tools, would allow you to do a full TCP pass-through using a timing attack over SQL injection. It would be horribly slow, but it would work. Okay? And effectively what you see is that as attackers, we use these tools, and while they're useful, these tools become tool chains that we get to leverage to full effect. And you start to see this stuff come through with defenders also. So if you guys haven't seen this talk, Diogo, Monica, and Nathan Macaulay, when they were working at Square, I think they both work for Docker now, did this talk on security at scale, where they were talking about building infrastructure that is resistant to exfiltration even when you owned. Okay, and the concept is relatively simple. You have a box in between that mediates the crypto, so that anything that's found is encrypted, and anyone who wants anything has to talk to your crypto mediator. But what's most interesting for me about their talk is they built this effectively HSM as a service. And they've got a quote that says, once we've built it, we started to find lots of things in the enterprise that could use it. Okay, so you start to fit it in lots of places. And again, it follows the exact same thinking that A, you need to build stuff, and B, once you start building stuff, you start finding more interesting places that you can use it. And this kind of comes back to a Paul Graham quote that I want to steal. Paul Graham, when talking about startups, says you should do things that don't scale. He says, like, everybody worries when they're building their startup, like, this won't scale. And it's like, that's really not your problem. Like, do things that don't scale and worry about scale later. And in defense, I think we kind of have the same problem. Like, lots of times I'd suggest to people, like, hey, why don't you just do this? And they'll tell you that won't scale in the enterprise. We'll get too many false positives. And mostly my thinking is like, yeah, let's try it. Like, let's get the false positives, and then we'll make our problem how to reduce false positives. But really, I think we are too cautious when it comes to defense just to try stuff. If you get a chance, I'm surprised I don't link to it. There's a really nice talk by Zane Lackey on attack-oriented defense. And it's mainly over his time at Etsy, running the Etsy security team. And one of the things that's cool about Zane's talk is, in his talk, he mentions some things that they tried. Like, they tried pruning all of the certificate authorities in the default machines. And he'll say, like, well, we thought this would happen, and no, we were totally wrong. Or they tried to enumerate every time there was a kernel module loaded on any of the Macs in their enterprise, because they thought, like, why would people be loading kernel modules? And it turns out you're completely wrong. Like, kernel modules are loading all the time on your MacBooks. But it's okay, because then they figured out what they should be aiming at and aimed at that instead. And essentially, that's just a little bit of hackiness that's needed. And one of the best examples of this for me, I'm not sure, how many of you remember NSA's fashion cleft stuff. Like there were so many code words that it's hard to remember them. But we did a blog post when this came out. I think in like December 2014. There should actually be a date. No, but one of the coolest things of the Snowden revelations for me was how the NSA was doing this fashion cleft and passive detection stuff, and our blog post essentially said, look, we now know the NSA was owning the planet. Other than the fact that defense sucks, why has nobody picked it up? Like, why are there so few boxes that tied back to NSA ownage? And if you go through the documents, you find this interesting thing, where they talk about a way of exfiltrating packets inside other packets, and then they talk about this passive detection. Okay, so essentially they put up these passive detection boxes all over the internet, and then they don't run your packet to that box, they run your packet past that box. Okay, so your data could be exfiltrating to box X, but they've picked it up as it passed the network that routed to box X along the way. It's a super cool hack. Like when you see it, you got to give them props. But something that's interesting about that is you see how easy that is to drive them insane, right? Like once you figure out what's happening, you figure out that you can do a little bit of work to give them a lot of work. Because if you make packets that look like they should be their packets, they've got to try to decrypt it and figure out if that's actually packets for one of their ongoing operations. That solution doesn't scale. You should tell them that. They've been owning people with it since 2008, right? And you'll notice again that that's a difference between attack and defense. Where attack goes like, yes, this is not perfect, it's stupid, but it works, which makes it not stupid. But with defense, we've been so used to holding vendors to account to giving us the perfect solution that we really expect perfect solutions too much of the time. And again, with the thing that's that fluid, it's not going to be perfect. And the thing that you take away from the NSA there, even if you looked at the recent release of exploits that are up for sale, I believe nobody is really bidding on that stuff yet. But one of the things you notice from that is that it's hacky and dirty, but works, okay? And one of the things you take away from that is that the NSA, or even TAO, embrace the hackiness, okay? And not hack as in break into stuff, I mean as in the, let's just get a solution that works. And so probably my biggest pitch today is for us to take away that defense is a series of little hacks too, okay? And if you spend time with your security guys or your defenders, you'll come up with dozens and dozens of things. And if not, hit me up on Twitter or mail me, because I've got tons of them, that you can start doing that are little hacks that start to give you a better idea for detection on your network. Again, to quote Etsy, so Rich Smith, another famous attacker who then tried his hand at defense, ended up saying, if your security engineers don't like hard problems and novel solutions, you've got the wrong ones, okay? Because that's what your defenders should be doing. Elsewhere, he says, you've got a limited number of no's. Your security team should be measured by what they enable on your network, not by what they forbid or what they stop. Okay, so really what we need to be doing is embrace the hack. Again, we need to make defense great again. I think we've actually got some time for questions. I'm not sure if we're going to do them or not. But if not, you can use Twitter to tell me why I'm wrong. That's what Twitter is there for. But yeah, thanks a lot for you guys' time.
Okay, great talk. And we have been thinking pretty much on the same lines for a long time. I have two things to say. First, about defense. There's an enormous difference whether you are buying a mass market product or a customized service. Let's say that you have some provider, for example, antivirus company, and they have anything from 10 million to 200 million to 500 million customers. That means that there's going to be a lot of customers who are very, very stupid. and their business practices are running EXEs from Word documents. Yes, we have customers like that. And that means that mass market defense solutions can never be attacker-proof for the fact that what is your clever attack breaking into a system is somebody else's business use case.
Absolutely. So I'm totally with you. The one thing that I want to add, though, and again, this is because we're actually trying to sell stuff, is I think there is value in stuff that you can buy as long as you're buying stuff with your eyes open and as long as you're using it right. The one thing that you can't do is outsource your thinking. So even with AV, if my mother-in-law still has a Windows machine, I put AV on it because I'm not going to tell her that she should be smarter about where she surfs. I tried to tell her that, but AV is probably a good idea also. So again, I think that comes down to knowing what you've got, knowing what you can do with it, and I think there's value there. I think one of the things that, specifically just to go down that rabbit hole, I think that we've been doing wrong with AV, and I mentioned this a few talks ago, is we used to give people standard advice. If I asked you if your IIS server has been compromised on the internet, what should you do? Almost any security guy will tell you you need to flatten it and reinstall it because your server ran attacker code and it has an untrusted security base. But for some reason, we trust machines that have had multiple viruses on them without reinstallation. Okay, fundamentally, it's the same problem. Attacker code has run on a machine. But in our heads, we just partition those two things. When a server gets compromised, it absolutely has to get flattened and restarted. When you get a virus on your machine, that's okay. Just clean it and move on. Okay, and again, I think there's some first principle thinking that needs to happen. There's some exciting technology that's out there that might help with this. The guys that are doing micro hypervisor snapshotting and stuff like that. But again, you need to know it, and you can't outsource your thinking.
About mass-produced products, AV is dead, and I'm talking from F-Secure, a company that used to make AV for years.
Right.
The real point is in the endpoint protection. So basically what we do is that we try to prevent the machine from getting owned. So we look at the infection vectors.
Right.
And that's where you get your money's worth on that type of defensive product. If you get the binary running there, the software has failed on at least four or five different levels already.
So I'm totally with you. And again, if we go down that rabbit hole, then I've got the bigger question. Like, it almost irritates me to find servers running in the enterprise without whitelisting these days. And you'll almost always hear defenders tell you why whitelisting is hard. And again, yes, it is. Figure it out. And I can understand if you tell me you don't want to whitelist workstations because they've got a lot of stuff to run. But your servers shouldn't be running a lot of stuff. Like you should be able to list the number of things that execute on your domain controller, and you should be able to get a graph when a new executable runs on your domain controller. And if you start to get fancy with that type of enumeration, you can start to enumerate which things have run on your network that have never run on your network before. And you'll start to get interesting stuff. Again, I genuinely think, like for people who speak to me now about getting into the industry, I genuinely think that there's more exciting times and space in defense because there's interesting stuff like this waiting to be built, either as commercial solutions or as solutions inside of the organization. But there's super beautiful hacks waiting to be done. Again, if we just make defense, make hack great again. Mr. Torrey.
So do you find there's some analogy between kind of spaghetti code that needed to get wrangled in by an SDLC and the ad hoc growth of networks that need to ensure business continuity? Is that partially why it's so hard for defenders to know their own networks, that they can't shut it down and like use a library and use clean code? They just have to keep everything running and then add stuff on?
Yeah, it's a good question. I'm guessing everyone heard the question, but I'll repeat it just because that's the done thing. So is it just that the defenders had to hack stuff together and get it working, and that's why it's so hard to do? In honesty, and I'm being presumptuous, like I accepted that excuse for a long time. Like we all accepted that excuse for a long time, and I think that excuse held more water when defenders were defenders part-time. But we're not anymore. Like now your security staff are full-time security staff who spend their time working on securing things. And so I don't think that's acceptable anymore. Like I think if you can give a member of your security staff a vacation, you can carve out a month for him to learn your network. Like, go learn it. Again, most pen testers don't have super long engagements. And on those 1 month, 2 month engagements, it's enough time to learn the technology, learn the networks. Defenders should be doing this too. I think there's an interesting bit of research for someone to do there, and it's one of the things that we haven't really gone into, which is whether we starting to get trained to learn a different way. So defenders end up having to learn a certain set of skills that prevent them from going deep on any technology, while attackers, to touch on something we were discussing the other day, almost lends itself to becoming T people. So you learn a wide range of things and then have the ability to go deep on certain things. And in truth, part of what I'm going for here is I'm hoping that just the changed awareness helps us roll differently. And if that doesn't help, then maybe there's more studying that has to go into it. Anyone else? Nope. Oh, we still have 3 minutes?
I'm talking quite a lot, but one of these things that I have noticed that is an extremely valuable for defense is to learn data collection and data analysis. Defense is essentially a statistics problem. You got to be able to get enough data to see the clean behavior of your environment, and after that you build statistics models, either traditional machine learning, doesn't matter. The only difference with the machine learning is top, because you can do real-time stuff that is way too expensive to do with traditional methods. And then you spot the attacker from things that are out of place in your organization. And that kind of defense is extremely difficult to evade, provided that you are collecting the right data in the first place. So it's a problem of data collection and data analysis.
So I'm totally with you. The one thing that I'd caution against there, just because I've seen lots of people doing it, like you can spot the things that hit the hype cycle and the things that dominate the flow at RSA. And I think 2 years ago, the dominant thing was seams and big data. So you see lots and lots of organizations that have bought into that logic that say we need to collect everything and then we're going to magically see these anomalies. And at this point, 2 years into it, they've paid for Hadoop and they have someone who kind of understands MapReduce. They've got large seams that are collecting a random collection of logs from different things. And any day now, they're going to start getting insights from their data. Again, I'd caution against that approach. I'd creep towards that. Like, I think there certainly are things you can instrument and get value from today. And as time goes on, you start expanding that collection and start doing better. But I think you start with identifying what it is you want to collect and what you're hoping to see. Mr. Hipponen.
I can't be the only one who would like to take a photo of you standing next to your make defense.
Thank you very much. I'm going to do something Trumpian. What's a Trump look?
You need to lose your jaw.
There you go. Thanks a lot, guys. Thanks.